Remakes and remasters, the comfort food of entertainment. Who doesn't love something that was proven to be good once, shoved into our faces 10 more times, but with a new coat of paint on top? This phenomena is nothing new, from books to movies to TV shows and heck, even music. The art of taking something that is once renowned and beloved and turning it into something new is, ironically, nothing new. Being as interested in video games as I am far from a stranger when it comes to the world of remakes and remasters. But before I get into any of that, you may be asking yourself, or not, and I'm going to force an explanation on you anyways, what is a remake and what is a remaster? Of course, if it isn't obvious enough, I'm going to be strictly talking about these terms in relation to video games. And so with that, a remake is simply a remake. Developers are going to go through and completely rebuild a game from the ground up, starting from scratch. Meanwhile, a remaster is different in the sense that the developers will take the original game and more or less build on top of it. Predominantly, this will be done through graphical enhancements, but sometimes developers will also take this opportunity to clean up some of the older code. But the point of a remaster is that they're not entirely starting from scratch, unlike how a remake is built. There is a little bit more nuance to this topic, of course, and you really can get into the weeds with arguing against if a game is a remake or a remaster, and trust me, there are people who do that, but honestly, I don't think it's that important to get all up in arms about it. Just a quick example to kind of prove how pointless that argument can get. The Elder Scrolls Oblivion 4 remaster recently released, and people are arguing if it's actually a remake, but the title itself and the developers call it a remaster, so I don't even see how this is an argument. So yeah, that's how pointless things can get. Plus, if you're thinking about this from the average consumer, are they going to care? I mean, do you really think when the new Halo 1 remake is released next year, some older millennials gonna be walking through the grocery store and be like, oh, I wonder if this was remade or if they only went through here and upgraded the graphics? No, they're gonna see a game that reminds them of being in high school, staying up all night drinking Mountain Dew. They're not gonna sit there and get all nitty gritty about if it's a remake or a remaster. The people who do that are home on Reddit. They're not at the grocery store. So yeah, if I accidentally classify a remake as a remaster or vice versa, don't come at me, because simply, I will not care. But if I claim to not care, what made me think about remakes and remasters? Well, like I said, I am far from any stranger when it comes to this kind of concept in video gaming, and that's because it seems like every other day there is a new release trailer for a remaster or rumors of a remake of your favorite childhood game in the works, and it's become really hard to ignore just how many of them there are. I mean, for crying out loud, we just got a second remaster of Super Mario Galaxy for the Nintendo Switch. But like I've said, this is nothing new, it just feels more prevalent. Going back to the SNES, Super Mario All-Stars was just a collection of remakes of the original NES games that were literally the prior console. Going even further back from that, arcade games were famously quote-unquote remade to be available on home consoles. They're not remade in the conventional sense of what we think of today, but they were technically remade with the purpose of selling it to a more broader audience, and is that much different than what modern remakes and remasters are doing? Now, with all of this said, I personally think that remaking and remastering video games is an overall positive thing. It can be hard to find negatives, and trust me, I will, but it's really hard to argue against a modern, oftentimes definitive edition of a video game being released. Obviously, there's the preservation of that game's legacy and history with re-releasing it, but more importantly, there's the accessibility. Not every game is available on a digital storefront. Some of these games are locked behind decades-old consoles, and second-hand resale pricing can be upwards of an arm and a leg to play some of these games. Of course, the simple solution is emulation. You can always set up an emulator, but not everyone's gonna do that just to play some old game. Plus, if you've never played the original, how would you know that you would want to even play it again in the modern day? With so many new options, why would you take a chance on a random old crusty PS1 game when you could play some new PS5 game? And that's kind of the beauty of a remake or a remaster. It's no longer a crusty old PS1 game, it can be a nice, clean, refreshed, polished PS5 game experience with a retro identity. There are tons of games that I have only played for the first time because they got remastered or remade to some extent. And that is the ultimate beauty when it comes to talking about the positives of a re-release in this fashion. Some games, for one reason or another, only gain popularity later, long after release. So with growing interest in people wanting to play that game, it can be harder for them to get a hold of the original, and that's where a remake or a remaster can perfectly capitalize off of that growing interest. For example, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door on the GameCube is famously known for being most people's favorite Paper Mario game, but with the resale market being so expensive, it was hard for a lot of people to justify or even get their hands on an original copy. So when Nintendo decided to remake that game for the Nintendo Switch, a lot of people were very rightfully excited to finally get their hands on this classic that everyone has hyped up for years, and of course, it even sold more than the original GameCube version. So yeah, of course, as a consumer, there can be a lot of pros when it comes to remakes and remasters being released. But what about from a developer or a publisher standpoint? Sticking with Paper Mario as an example, this could be a great way for Nintendo to kind of return to their roots with the series. Paper Mario has very infamously turned away from its original turn-based RPG mechanics, and with the success of Thousand Year Door, that can show them that, hey, this is what fans are still receptive to, and hopefully going forward in the series, if they ever make a new game, it can be like the original and Thousand Year Door. And that is something that fans, even myself included, have been wanting for years out of Paper Mario. Another great pro that can come out of remakes and remasters on the developer side of things is that it can be a way to introduce new players to your series. It can be really daunting to get into some of these gaming series with just how many games there are, but if one of the original games, or even better yet, the first game in a series is remade, it can be a great jumping in point for new players. Funny enough, that's actually how I was introduced into both Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. Both are long-running Japanese RPG series, and that can be very daunting to try and hop into, especially if you don't really have much knowledge of either series. But with the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection, I got the chance to experience some of the original NES games, as well as learn that each is its own standalone experience. With that, I was able to go from Final Fantasy 1 straight into Final Fantasy 16 without feeling like I skipped a beat, and that is something I would have never done if they didn't remaster those original 6 games. It's a very similar story for me with Dragon Quest. Square Enix recently remastered the original 3 Dragon Quest games using the HD 2D method, which was a great way to experience Dragon Quest for someone who has never played any of those games before. The Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake has easily become one of my favorite games, and I would have never gotten to experience it if it wasn't for them remaking it. It also got me new interest in the Dragon Quest series as a whole. While they can be more connected than a Final Fantasy game, each Dragon Quest still does stand on its own, and so now I am eagerly and excitedly waiting for Dragon Quest XII whenever that comes out, which is something I would have never said if I hadn't played these remakes. So yeah, remakes and remasters are great for both players and publishers. So what could you possibly say bad about them? This is where I get very conflicted about my feelings when it comes to talking about remakes and remasters. As much as I love them, and as much as I've spoke positively on them for the past 9 minutes or so, I would almost always rather prefer a wholly brand new experience. Maybe that's greedy of me, but I will always prefer something new over something old. Like I said, there are ways to experience those older games, whether that be buying the original copies and hardware or through emulation. They are always most likely going to be there. I know I just said that Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake is one of my favorite games, period, but that's more of an exception than a constant. Most of my favorite games have always been these new, unique experiences, and not some graphically enhanced re-release. I would rather the resources and talent go towards making something new and exciting that we haven't seen before, and not towards just making an old game for a second or even third time. But with that being said, a lot of the times these aren't the same developers who are going to be working on the main big new projects from a series, but still, that's time and resources that could be going towards something else. Also, more times than not, these remakes and re-releases are getting the same MSRP price tags as brand new games. So at that point, why wouldn't I just want something new? To better illustrate my argument, let me make a hypothetical example. Fans for years had been clamoring for Nintendo to make a brand new 2D platformer for the Super Mario Bros. Franchise, and we finally did get that in the form of Super Mario Bros. Wonder. It's an amazing new take on the formula that I think we can confidently say most people enjoyed. Now, let's say instead of Wonder, we ended up with a Super Mario Bros. World remake. It would still be an equally great game that I think a lot of people would still be very excited for, but would it be the same as a whole new game like what we got with Wonder? I don't think so. It could be the best version of that game with the best graphics available, and it could still introduce a few new ideas, but at the end of the day, a Super Mario Bros. World remake wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have innovated or pushed the series forward as much as Wonder ultimately has. And I think an example like this is exactly why I will always prefer something new over something repackaged and redelivered. A remake or a remaster can be a new experience to a certain consumer, but that's not always the case. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is a spruced up version of Mario Kart 8 from the Wii U, and it was a great way for many people to experience that game for the very first time. But if you were like me and you had it on the Wii U, there was already tons of playtime put into Mario Kart 8 before it was ever even announced to be coming to Nintendo Switch. For someone like me, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe wasn't really worth it. I kind of just wish they would have made a new Mario Kart, a Mario Kart 9 hypothetically, but I did eventually years later pick it up, and I'm glad I did, but in the moment, I didn't see the value in re-releasing that game. And I'm sure there are people that feel that way about every single remake or remaster that releases. Now, I've been discussing remakes and remasters as if they are always 100% the definitive version of that game, that they're somewhat replacing the original, and that is quite literally the furthest thing from the truth. A remake of a game is not a replacement for the original, it's closer to a substitution? And even then, that doesn't feel right saying. A remake is an entirely separate product from the original game. Simply put, this is not the same game as this. Of course, there are some remakes and remasters that are pretty close to a one-to-one from the original, but even then, they're still not going to be the same. Maybe controls have been tweaked, or that one glitch that has been patched out. There's always going to be something different, even if it comes down to just playing on different hardware, and it's nothing software related at all. They are still going to have their differences, and there's always going to be people who say you should play one or the other, and they're probably going to have valid arguments as to which one you should play. And that's because I think a lot of people forget that video games are art, and you don't just replace art. I mean, someone could come out and say that they're remastering Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night painting, but that wouldn't invalidate the original, of course. It would just be another artist's interpretation of that painting. And the same is true about video games. Sure, maybe the common consensus about it is a little different, but yeah, video games are art, and someone coming through and remastering an old video game is just another artist's interpretation of that piece. It's very rare that the original development team, or hardly anybody involved in the original product, comes back at all when remastering a game, so it's entirely new brains taking their interpretation of what that game should be. Even really small artistic interpretations that the original team intentionally added could be either misunderstood or completely forgotten entirely. Remakes can completely change tone and direction of these video games in drastic ways, even if they're not intentionally trying to do that, and that's just kind of the downside when it comes to remastering or remaking a piece of art. Also, a lot of these older games especially are created around limitations. It's no secret that retro hardware had its limitations, and game developers had to work around that in very creative and clever ways. And when you're working now with the modern video gaming hardware, you no longer have those limitations. It's like going from painting with oil on canvas to digital art with a drawing tablet. Both are two means to an end, but they're completely two different styles that are going to give you two completely different results. So yeah, with all of that said, it's totally understandable why some people are going to prefer the original versions of these games as opposed to a remake or a remaster, because artistically speaking, they are two completely different works. Now, I wouldn't say that all of this completely deconstructs my previous arguments. I do think a lot of what I previously have said still stands, but it is important to say that yes, a remake is a completely different product from what it is remaking. And as an example, there is no better game to show than Final Fantasy VII Remake. What has been done to remake the original Final Fantasy VII is so bold and different from the original, it's almost impossible to say that you could play the remakes and get the same exact experience as playing the original. I mean, they're not even the same genre of RPG. Obviously, the original is a turn-based and the new one is an action. Also, the story has been completely stretched out and so much extra content has been added. The time it would take you to complete the original game from the 90s is how much time it would take you to do at most a third of this new remake trilogy. When I first started playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, I kind of went into it with the mentality of, oh, this is going to be what completely replaces my need to play the original, and I'll get all of the same experience out of it, and I'll know what everyone has been talking about for all these years. And now that I've played it, and I've played Rebirth as well, I definitely have to go back and play the original, because I never have played it, and I can very confidently say that these remake games are not going to give me the same experience that I know that original game will. And yeah, I know that this is all a very exaggerated example to kind of show the extreme of how the original and the remake can be very different products, but it doesn't have to be this extreme of a difference to still get my point across. I mentioned Super Mario All-Star Collection a while back, and yeah, those 16-bit remakes of the original NES games are not a direct replacement for the originals. I actually still prefer to play the original NES Super Mario Bros. Over the Super Mario All-Star Collection version. I couldn't exactly tell you why, it's just my preference, and I think that'll always be my preference. The All-Star Collection is not a replacement for the original. Now, if you've spent enough time around the video gaming community, you do know that people are very opinionated, and they're gonna have their preferences on which versions of the game they want to play. But this doesn't just stay contained in the fanbase, it kind of also bleeds into developers as well. Just recently, Capcom had to be convinced to put the PS1 ports of Resident Evil on GOG, and they said that they thought the remakes provided the superior experience. And while that may be true, there's still going to be people who would rather play the original, whether that be what they grew up with, or maybe it's even just curiosity of wanting to see the differences. I could even see some saying that the worse graphics provide a better vibe and atmosphere for that game. So there are reasons to play the original, as well as there are reasons to play remasters and remakes, of course. So what does all of this amount to? I think it's very safe to say that remaking and remastering to re-release a game is an overall positive experience. There's more pros than there are cons. But it's important not to overlook those cons, because yeah, you can be missing out on new experiences, or heck, you could get stuck with developers who think it's better to just put the remake out there and use that as an excuse to lock away the original out of accessibility. So maybe it's closer to a monkey paw wish when you're asking for your favorite game to get remade. Maybe the remake will be amazing, have great graphics, improved controls, quality of life improvements, but you may never have access to the original game in a very legitimate and easily accessible way. Is that a worth it trade to you? I don't know. It could be. To some it could be. To others, maybe not. And that's what's so weird about discussing remakes and remasters like this, is that I think the value of that re-release is kind of in the eye of the beholder. Super Mario Galaxy 2 just got a remaster for the Nintendo Switch alongside the second remaster for Super Mario Galaxy 1. Now, rightfully so, a lot of people are upset that they think the prices of these games are too high and they're kind of refusing to buy them and somewhat boycott these releases. Which is totally understandable, especially if all you're interested in is Galaxy 1 and you already had that on the 3D All-Stars collection, there's no point to buying the second remaster. But Super Mario Galaxy 1 is my favorite video game, so I will be buying the remaster again. I know it's stupid, I know it's overpriced, but the game means so much to me that the value is there for me. But I 100% understand if it's not there for everybody else. The Luigi Mansion 2 remake was put on the Nintendo Switch, and I was kind of excited for that when it was first announced, but I kind of talked myself out of it because it was hard to see the value in getting it because I already own Dark Moon on the 3DS. And if I ever wanted to go and replay Luigi's Mansion 2, I would just replay it on my 3DS. But obviously people bought Luigi's Mansion 2 for Nintendo Switch, so there is value in that game to others, just not me. On the other hand of all this, there are remakes that have such value to me that I actually think they're better than the originals. I don't think I could ever see myself playing the original versions of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening or Super Mario RPG. Those remakes are so well done, and I feel like I can get the same exact experience out of playing the original, so why would I go back to those older games? I mean, I guess I do prefer the old school graphics, but that's almost entirely nostalgia speaking. But yeah, that's kind of just the variety you can get when it comes to discussing remakes and remasters. Some are well done and receive plenty of praise for being a great alternative to playing the original, while some are so poorly handled that it's almost an insult to the original game's identity. And this isn't a universal rule. Each remake or remaster or re-release or whatever is going to be different to each consumer. Everyone's going to have different opinions and different views on what is worth it and what is not, and what is good and what is bad, and that is what's so unique about discussing these types of games. And that's okay. I also think the developers understand this as well. There's a reason that there's a lot of secondary teams or even outsourced teams working on these remakes, because if they were so confident that everybody would love and eat this up, they would just put their primary teams on developing it, but no, they don't typically do that. I think it's best to look at these remakes and remasters as kind of a little treat, I guess. It's not replacing a primary new experience, but it's also not going to replace the old original experience. It's kind of just something extra. And I think that's the best way to describe these re-releases. They're just extra. If you like it and are interested, by all means, go out and play and experience this game. Don't let some purist tell you that a remake is a terrible version of the game. If it looks interesting, play it. And heck, you might even like it so much it inspires you to go back and play the original. And on the other hand, if a remake or a remaster doesn't seem interesting to you, are you really missing anything? Especially if you've played the original, you're not gonna miss anything new with skipping a remake. And that's totally cool. I think the only reason that all of this could eventually become a problem is if developers and publishers only started prioritizing remakes or remasters, and that could easily be offset by the consumer's wallet. So as long as we're not exclusively buying these re-releases, I think we can still count on these developers still giving us brand new experiences as well. It's kind of a yin-yang. You get the best of the old in an ideal world, as well as new, bright ideas that are being released to us. And so yeah, the way I see it, as long as we are still receiving great new experiences from these developers, I have no issue with receiving a remake or a remaster from time to time. I mean, at the end of the day, they're just an old game that's usually proven to be popular or successful with just a different coat of paint on top of it. And just because there's a new coat of paint doesn't mean it's not the same old content that we've all come to know and love.